Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Life by Design podcast. On this week's episode, I talk with Lilly Geering. Lilly is a provisional psychologist, hypnotherapist, women's coach, and fashion model. During her modeling career, she's dealt with eating disorders and poor body image, which she learned to overcome through her skills and strategies acquired in her psychology degree. She now coaches women, helping them improve their confidence, body image, self-worth, and more. She also has a keen interest in psilocybin-assisted therapy, where she has conducted a meta-analysis as part of her honours thesis. In this week's episode, expect to learn the world of modelling and body image, emotional eating and the psychology of it, the pros and cons of the body positivity movement, the world of psychedelics, the different groups of disorders, and much, much more. Enjoy the episode. Now, guys, before we start this week's episode of the podcast, I want to talk to you about the Life by Design Mastermind. The Life by Design Mastermind is the mastermind for go-getters and high achievers who are looking to create a more successful, fulfilling, and balanced life by design. If you're serious about transforming your life, achieving your goals, and living a life on your terms, then the Life by Design is your golden ticket. Head over to the show notes and click on the link for more details about the program. Lilly Geering, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Blake. Thanks for having me.
Very good to have you here. Guys, this is Lilly. She's one of our friends, actually. And what is wild is that we've only been friends for 7 months.
Yeah. Even though you've known my husband, Jay, for a long time.
I know. We go way back. 1 degree of separation for the last 22 years, Jay and I. But
that's crazy.
You and I, 7 months. We are here to talk about a lot more than that. Could go down a number of different paths today, which I'm really excited about. So can you give the guys a 60 to 90 second spiel of who you are and what's got you to where you are today?
Okay, that's hard. 60 to 90 seconds.
See how you go. I'm not going to put the timer on though. You can go over if you need to.
So my name is Lilly. I am from Germany, but I live in Byron, just like Blake. I've been a model for 10 years or maybe even 11. So I started when I was 16 and I've been studying psychology for 6 years now. So I am just wrapping up my studies. I'm starting placement soon. I'm a provisional psychologist. I'm also a hypnotherapist and I love everything brain, mind, mindset, changing your neurology. And I've recently started coaching women around confidence and body image, but I'm getting such a mixed bag. Like some women want help in their relationships, others want help in their life, finding purpose and alignment. So it's a very mixed bag.
How would you, body image is fascinating for me. And I think, although my understanding is blokes' challenges with body image is definitely on the rise, how would you describe your relationship with body image over an extended period of time?
Yeah, so when I started modeling, I had some very strict agencies that would constantly tell me I had to lose weight. I would get measured every time I would go into the agency. And that all just culminated in me just constantly finding things that were wrong with my body. I hated the way I looked. I was like 10 kilos lighter than I am now, but I still thought I wasn't skinny enough. I was tiny and it had an impact on my health, physical and mental. So yeah, I had a really bad body image. Like I couldn't see that I was very thin. I still thought, I wasn't thin enough. I always felt like my proportions were off. Like I don't know, I constantly felt like there was something wrong with how I looked. And I thought that the solution was in changing my body more. But then I changed my mindset and that's where I found freedom rather than in changing the body.
What does that look like? So to think how small you are now and to think you were 10 kilos lighter is wild. I don't know how you didn't break, like walking out the door. What does that look like on a daily basis with someone who has those type of one thought process, but two, the expectations? Like what do you see when you look in the mirror 10 kilos lighter and still think that you're not lean enough or light enough or whatever? Like what's that process look like?
Like on a day-to-day basis, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would always step on the scales first thing, and that would kind of determine my mood for the day. I don't do that anymore. And I tell all of my clients to ditch their scales because it's just a number and it can literally set you up for a shit day. So that would happen first. And then like, depending on what I would be doing that day, I don't know, like if I would have to take Polaroids at the agency, I probably wouldn't eat breakfast. And then I would like walk for like 5 hours because I was living in London. You were walking a lot anyway. And then I would do hours of cardio at the gym and, I wouldn't eat carbs and I was just restricting a lot. And yeah, I was just constantly not happy with how I looked, constantly not happy with how photos turned out, a lot of negative self-talk. So I think, and all my clients who struggle with the same voices as well, when you're so obsessed with your body and your image and food, it takes up so much space in your brain that it doesn't allow you to even enjoy life because you're just constantly thinking about the next meal, what to eat, what not to eat, when to exercise. Like it's like a dark cloud in your head that takes up so much space. And ever since not obsessing over that anymore, I have so much more time to enjoy the good things in life. It's crazy.
I assume one of the challenges with any, we'll call it negative just for the sake of this. I assume one of the challenges is knowing that you have a negative relationship with it, because there'd be a lot of people in a similar boat who aren't sure what a healthy relationship with body image is, like you're in your own mind. So how do you know what's healthy and what's not? What needed to happen for you to realize, maybe this isn't a very healthy relationship I've got with myself? Like, what was that moment, or what happened where you started to go, okay, this isn't healthy?
Wow, that's such a good question. I'm not sure it was one moment for me. I think it was a gradual transition, and you're spot on. So a lot of people that are in the thick of an eating disorder, like for example, anorexia, they can't see that they have a problem, that can't see that they're too thin. And the eating disorder takes control over their mind to the point that they actually don't want to get better. I'm actually starting my placement in a specialist eating disorder team in 2 weeks, which is very aligned. So I'm very excited. And eating disorders are very hard to treat for that very reason. So in psychology, we distinguish between ego-syntonic disorders and ego-dystonic disorders. So ego-syntonic disorders are eating disorders and personality disorders, where it's become so much part of the person that the person can't see that they have a problem, where someone with depression knows that they have a problem and they want to get better. So the ego-syntonic disorders are much harder to treat because it's very hard for the person to have insight into their problem. But yeah, for me, I think Jay, my husband, played a huge role in this because he would just shower me with so much love and just constantly tell me how beautiful I was. And I think he mirrored back in a very loving way that I was being very harsh with myself. And then at some point I realized it, but I didn't want to face it. And then at some point I was like, okay, I should face it, but I still felt like I couldn't because I was still relying on modeling for income. So I wasn't willing to challenge those beliefs and, put on weight because I was so stuck in the modeling world and I wouldn't allow myself to put on weight as long as I was still modeling. So I actually took a year off. That was in 2021. Yeah, just to look after my health because I lost my period because I lost so much weight. And I was like, I need to get this back in control. So I took a year off modeling and allowed myself to put on weight and just not stress about it so much. So that was probably a turning point for me.
There's a few questions from that I want to go into, but can you just go back? I've never heard that language before. Ego-syntonic. And what was the other one?
Dystonic.
Dystonic. So can you just explain those to me? So ego-syntonic is behaviors that you can't see. Behaviors definitely isn't the right word, but what is it that you can't see?
It's that the disorder has...
Disorder was what I was looking for. Yeah.
Yeah. So the disorder, like let's say an eating disorder or personality disorder, it's so much part of the person that it's hard for the person to see it as a problem or see it as separate. Like, for example, a personality disorder, it's literally your personality. So like someone with a narcissistic personality disorder.
I've literally just written the word narcissistic down on paper. Yeah.
They don't know that they have that because they think they're normal, But someone with depression knows that they have a problem and they want to get better. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It's fascinating. I've never heard that. So can you just for clarity, put a few disorders into each category for me? So I know obviously depression fits into dystonic.
Yeah.
So you've got narcissism, personality disorders. What else would fit into ego-syntonic?
Other personality disorders like personality disorder, histrionic personality disorder, dependent personality disorder, the list goes on. So a lot of the time people with those disorders present to treatment because of some other issues. For example, someone with borderline personality disorder is very likely to also have depression or maybe to have a substance use disorder. So they come in for treatment for those things. And then it often takes a long time for them to actually get the proper diagnosis because that's not the problem that they come in for.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
It's very rare. I know narcissism gets thrown around a lot and it's probably not as common as the way we throw it around, but I assume it's, from what I understand, it's very rare for a narcissist to self-diagnose, like very rare. In fact, if a narcissist does self-diagnose, it almost, to a certain degree, might even cancel them out of narcissism, I'm guessing, from what I've heard.
Yeah, I've never heard of anyone to say that they are narcissists. I don't want to say that it's never happened because I don't know the research around it, but yeah, I would agree with you.
I started finding a guy yesterday who's self-diagnosed narcissist. And I was like,
Oh,
fuck
wow.
you, that literally the only person on planet Earth that I've heard of that does it.
Yeah, that's very self-reflected.
So I find that fascinating. Never heard that term. When it came to putting on weight, how was that first month, 2 months, 3 months? Because I can only assume that kind of came about with its challenges as well in terms of feeling comfortable putting on weight, did it? And is that a common theme, I'm guessing, for a lot of people who are kind of creating a different relationship to food and their weight?
It felt a bit odd. So first when I gave myself permission, and Jay, my husband, will laugh if he listens to this, because it was my birthday and I was like, okay, this is it. I am going to eat all the things. I'm going to put on weight. So I was literally eating all the pasta, all the dessert. So I put on weight pretty quickly. And then I did feel weird in my skin. I think when you put on weight really quickly as well, it just feels odd. You haven't developed muscle. So I felt uncomfortable in my skin. And I actually struggled a lot that year because I was still so far from finishing my studies. I like put modeling on hold. So I was a bit like, who am I? What am I doing? I didn't really know what direction to take my Instagram into. So I felt a bit lost for that time. We actually went back to Adelaide and stayed at the beach house and literally just isolated ourselves during COVID. So it was an interesting time. But yeah, it was difficult for me to put on weight, and it's something you have to learn to become comfortable with. One thing that actually really helped me as well was a psilocybin trip. You're nodding. You're like,
Yeah, it's a language, girl. Now we're talking.
I actually did my first trip in Byron. I've actually done every trip I've ever done in Byron.
People fucking love that story. That's so cliche. I did my first psychedelic trip in Byron. Fancy that.
Yeah.
Continue.
So that was in that year. So that was, I think, maybe like 3 months into my putting on weight journey and, putting modeling on hold. So I didn't even take that much. I took maybe like 1.5 grams and I was on another planet. And it was like definitely enough for me. And I just cried for hours straight. I cried so much and I felt such an intense sense of love for myself. And the only way I can describe it is that it was from God. It actually strengthened my faith in God as well, because I was like, there's no way that this is a mushroom that's loving me right now. It must be God. And then I cried so much about all the years that I was so hard on myself. So it was almost like I felt sad for myself. It wasn't pity. It was more just real pain about the fact that I was talking myself down so much, that I was denying myself so many different foods, and that I was that I saw myself in such a negative light. And yeah, that was really transformational for me in my self-love journey for sure.
When it comes to food, and let's say that you're supporting someone change their relationship with health, how do you speak to the difference between eating well to nourish your body and I guess eating quote unquote well as a way of managing your weight or whatever? Because you can be doing the same thing, but they're coming from a very different energy. So how do you think about your own process of, let's say eating, a really simple example, eating an apple when it came from potentially a negative fear energy, and potentially eating an apple for the sake of nourishing? Like how have you gone through that process yourself?
That's such a great question. And I also feel like, because there's such a strong movement now towards body positivity and anti-diet culture, that I've actually felt in the past that when I would choose the healthy option, I would think that I was being judged for having disordered eating. So it's exactly what you're saying. I think for me, I could be eating exactly the same way, but what's happening in my head, that's the difference. So if I'm eating a salad because that's what I feel like, I want to nourish my body with all the good things in there, that is different from me thinking I need to punish myself for eating certain things on the weekend and coming from that negative place. And when I work with clients, I usually ask what are your eating patterns like? Would you say your eating is disordered? So I just put it on them and ask them. And then they will usually, kind of describe how they eat, what they eat. But then what I always ask is, how often do you think about food? Do you feel like food is controlling your life? Because now I think about food 3 or 4 times a day, because every time I need to eat, I'll think about it before. Whereas before I was probably thinking about food 100 times a day. So it's all about how much space does it take up in your brain? Is it controlling you? Do you have negative emotions around it? And yeah, of course, if someone, doesn't eat carbs, doesn't eat fats, only eats like protein and lettuce leaves, then I would also say that's not nourishing enough. So I'm not a nutritionist, but I would say if someone is getting, their carbs, their fats, their proteins, and their vegetables, that's nourishment, unless the eating is disordered in their head, because there's actually a lot of eating disorders where people have a normal weight. We always think an eating disorder means that you have anorexia, but you can have bulimia, for example, and be a normal weight, but your relationship with food is really unhealthy. So you can't always see an eating disorder. It's what's in here, in the head.
Yeah, that's true. Good pick up. When you think about your experience with eating disorder, it's really interesting you use the language just then. I'd be fascinated to know, because I'm sure in the modeling world you saw a lot of this. For someone to come straight at you and say, do you have an eating disorder? What's the type of response to that? Because I assume you've got to move through a level of shame for a lot of people to even get to that place. Does that feel quite jarring coming at it with that energy? Or how, did people ask you these type of questions? And what was your relationship like with being open and transparent? Because I assume there's a lot, that happens behind the door for fear of shame, guilt, judgment, all of those things. So what do you remember that being like for you?
Do you mean when I speak with my clients?
Yeah. And even when you speak with your clients, but also when people might have brought that to your attention when you were going through your own struggle. What do you remember? Did you hide from it? Were you very open and transparent? What was your relationship like with that?
Yeah, I was definitely in denial when people commented about it with me, which is super common. I was never diagnosed with an eating disorder. I just need to say that. And there's a difference between having disordered eating or having an eating disorder. So an eating disorder is diagnosed by a psychologist, and you need to meet certain criteria in the DSM-5 or in the ICD-11, whereas disordered eating...
And I like to ask a lot of questions. Let's go back for a sec. What is a DSM-5 and what is a something 11? What are those two things?
So they are classification systems of disorders. So the DSM is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders.
Yeah.
So every single mental disorder that you can think of is in there.
Really? How many are in there, do you reckon?
Oh, hundreds.
That's wild.
Yeah, there's so many. And then there's the ICD-11, which is the International Classification System of Diseases. And that has physiological, so medical and psychological disorders.
So what type of questions would have you diagnosed as having an eating disorder?
So for anorexia, so it differs between the two classification systems. For anorexia, one of the questions is BMI, so your weight or body mass index. And then, you have to restrict food and or have use certain measures to burn calories. So, run a lot or whatever. And there's those are some of them, but then there's more in there. And then
do you have to reach a certain number? Yeah. So do you remember how many questions it is? Is 20 and you've got to be over 15 or something like that?
I'm not sure about the exact numbers. Or for example, borderline personality disorder, I know it's 5 out of 9 as an example.
Yeah, narcissism.
I'm not sure about anorexia right now. Yeah, wouldn't know. So as a psychologist, when you diagnose, you actually have the book there. To do it in your head, you're actually supposed to go through, because otherwise a lot of diagnostic mistakes can be made. So now when I have clients, I don't say, do you have an eating disorder? I mean, I will ask that because, if they've been diagnosed with one, I need to know. But I say, is your eating disordered from your perspective? Would you say you have disordered eating? And I know that for some people there is shame around it, but I make sure to build sufficient rapport first so that there is that sense of trust with my clients. And also, I've been very open about my own story with disordered eating in the past on my Instagram, which is where all of my clients come from. So I think knowing that I've gone through it, that removes a lot of the shame for them.
I 100% agree with this point. I think you and I can't remember if you and I have spoken about this.
Yes.
We have, haven't we? Yeah. So and there's no right or wrong. I've got Lilly, and I've got a couple of other good friends and good clients who are on the psychology side of things. And from what I remember, you're not really allowed to talk about your own personal experience, are you, as a psychologist, in terms of that element of rapport?
Yeah. So that's self-disclosure and to keep that as minimal as possible.
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
Because I 100% these days would not go like I wouldn't be able to share my deepest, darkest of secrets with a practitioner of sorts who didn't give me a little bit of them in terms of revealing some things. So it's fascinating because I also know obviously you and a couple of other people in the space who, yeah, I mean, it's such a different way of thinking, but I can totally see both sides as well. I just personally, for me, find it so much more comforting when I see a little bit of the darkness or the struggles of my practitioner as well. So just so I'm clear on that, for you, do you have to take that stuff down when you're qualified from your socials? Do you know?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
Because I'm also building a brand out of my social media. So it would be,
that's cool.
yeah, it'd be a shame if I would have to take that down. I actually spoke to my supervisor yesterday for my upcoming placement, and I kind of told him that I have a bit of an online presence, and said, that's good to know. I think, there's no like hard and fast rules around it. It's
100%.
more just, every practitioner has to decide it themselves. And it's usually the role is only use self-disclosure if it helps the client.
That's good. That's a good bit to distinguish.
Yeah, so you could say, I've gone through something like that, but you don't want, if a client like shares the darkest secret with them and then you're like, oh yeah, I've been there, I've done that, like this worked out for me, it can be dismissive in a way. So I think that's different from someone seeing on my Instagram what my story has been and then coming to me and then we focus on them rather than, a friend giving advice and being like, oh yeah, that happened to me and this is what I did and you'll be fine. I think that's sort of where that rule is coming from, is that don't make it about you, make it about the client.
It's very dismissive. And we want to preface this with most people are well intended with that. They think by sharing their story, it builds rapport, but it actually doesn't. And it's quite dismissive, albeit well intended.
Like unsolicited advice.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's my...
That's so good. So what do you remember being the case for you when you started to put on weight? Were you successful the first time that you did it? So what I mean by that is maybe the first time you went to put on weight, it didn't feel great and you went back to your old ways. Or did you just like, it was one hit, I'm going to put on weight. And for that reason, you were able to kind of, put the 10 kilos on. And like, what was that process like for you? Do you remember it?
I just kind of kept going. Like I didn't go back to losing weight again. It was hard mentally, but I think because it was linked to my fertility, I kind of had the motivation to do it. And I think I just made it my mission to stop obsessing over my body so much. So as hard as it was, I just used it as an opportunity to really challenge my body image and my beliefs about myself around my body and my weight. So, but yeah, it was tough. It was tough, but it gets better. And I'm just so much happier now. Like I don't stress about food. Like if I can't make it to the gym, so be it. I don't care. I don't think about food all the time. And it's just so liberating. Like I've never felt more free in my mind.
For a lot of people, when it comes to addictions, and I know this is completely different, so I'm mindful of that, it's a trade-off. For some, it's, trading in alcohol for an exercise addiction or whatever it might be. Did you find that you needed to shift your focus? Like if as you said, it consumed your daily thoughts, was there just space in your mind, or did you find you kind of shifted your attention and time and headspace to something else?
I love that you asked that because that's definitely what happened. And I tell my clients all the time, I say, don't focus inwards so much. Stop stressing about yourself. Look out into the beautiful world, focus on what you can do for other people, find a new hobby. And something that was like the last missing puzzle that clicked into place was actually early this year. So I felt like I'd healed maybe 95%, but sometimes I was still kind of thinking about food. But I think it was just maybe a boredom thing, or maybe it was just a habit. And then I started reading fiction again, and I got your beautiful partner, Shani, onto that as well. Yeah. And then that became my new obsession. Yeah, literally obsessed. It became my new obsession. And I would just like read all day, and all of a sudden it would be like 1 p.m. And I'm like, I haven't even eaten today, which would have never happened before because it was just a habit of like thinking about food. So yeah, for me, even though I healed so much, I feel like this year, like the last piece to the puzzle clicked into place where I'm like, that's my new obsession. And yes, I do think you find other things. There's never empty space in my mind.
Beautiful. When you think about that body image stuff, was the modeling the instigator of the challenges with food, or was that a byproduct of potentially, younger years where you might have struggled with it? Because sometimes it can be the the piece that instigates the pattern, or it can just accentuate a pattern that was already there previously. What was that like for you?
I would say it was definitely there. And, I think most women struggle with this just because of social media and societal expectations and pressures and the diet culture. And especially because when I was a teenager, it was, that was way before the body positivity movement. And it was way before it was hot to like have muscles and stuff. It was very much just be thin. So that was definitely there, but the modeling just amplified it. And I think because there wasn't that awareness back then that was unhealthy, I just fully went with it, and that became my truth. And I was so impressionable, and I felt so embarrassed about my body, so that when an agent would comment on my body, I felt like apologetic for my body. And I just so ran with that narrative. Like I never even challenged it. And yeah, I was 16, so very impressionable at that age.
How do you see the body positivity movement? And is there any, let's say, downside? Is there anything that you don't necessarily agree with as part of this body positivity movement? Because I have a couple of pieces that don't sit quite so well with me. So I'm interested to see your thoughts on it.
I can imagine what those things are. I think it's great. I think what usually happens is when you're at one extreme, to make a change, you go to the other extreme. It's like a pendulum. And then it takes a while for things to be in the middle, in like a healthy middle. So I think right now we're at the far opposite end. And, what I don't agree with is obesity to the point that is unhealthy.
Sister, we're on the same page then. We are on the same page.
I mean, I don't judge people that do it. I just think it might be unhealthy to promote that. But then, that might give them so much freedom within their minds that if they're happy that way, then they should do that. But yeah, I do think that, things need to kind of come back into the middle a little bit, and we shouldn't be promoting extremes on either end. But I'm just kind of watching it.
I don't know how much you've explored this, but as a female, it'd be fascinating to get your opinion. Do you truly think that someone is obese, like truly think that they could be happy? And the reason I say that from an emotional eating point of view, I've been criticised on this before, and a chick called Michelle Bridges, I don't know if you were in Australia when she pretty much gave the psychology or the psychological component of like obesity. If you really get to the core of it, you couldn't be possibly happy, which is an interesting statement. But I tend to be more on that side of like, these, and again, I'm mindful of what I'm saying, but if it causes uproar, it causes uproar. If you're 50, 60, 70, 80 kilos overweight and you are claiming to be happy, to understand the psychological component of food, I would challenge that. Where do you sit with it?
I think there are obviously a lot of things happening. So if your weight prevents you from doing a lot of things in life, for example, walking or exercising, those things change your brain chemistry and they can make you happy. So you would obviously be missing out on those things. So that is one thing. But then, if the person says they're happy, I'm not here to challenge them. And I think as a professional, it's important for me to put aside my personal views about that. Like,
totally.
I need to be non-judgmental. And I am. Like, if someone comes to me and they say, I'm happy, my weight's not a problem, then I say, fine. Like, I will only ever work with someone on what is a problem for them, not a problem for me.
Yeah, gotcha. I like it. Well played. When it comes to this psychedelic experience, you've done a fair bit of research into it, which is fascinating. What did you find in your research around psilocybin?
Yeah, so I loved my mushroom trip so much that I just started, listening to all things mushrooms and psychedelics, and I was just like, this is just the best thing ever. So then I decided to do my honors thesis on psilocybin. So I spoke to my supervisor and he said, well, you can't run a study with participants because psilocybin is still illegal in Australia. So I was like, oh, okay, what can I do? So he said, what you can do is do a meta-analysis. So in a meta-analysis, you pull together all the research that's out there on a topic and you pull that together into a study. So in a normal study, each data point is a participant. In a meta-analysis, each data point is one study. So you work out the averages of the studies. So you get an overall effect size. So that is the size of the effect of the intervention, in this case, psilocybin. But you can also calculate lots of, moderators or mediators. So you can kind of, for example, I try to work out which disorder psilocybin works best for, or which dosage works best. So you can kind of like work out other little details.
What did you find when it came to dosages? Because I originally, as a psychedelic practitioner, went in with the hero's dose, the 5 grams. And I'm also mindful of like how long's a piece of string in terms of different options and different mushrooms and things like that. Depending on the person, their sensitivity, their weight, a lot of those things. There were occasions where 5 grams was just blowing people up, and not in the best of ways. But what does the research say around dosages?
Yeah, so I did look at that and I found that the higher dosages got better results. However, that was capped, obviously, like not higher, infinitely. But the studies that had 1 or 2 large doses worked better than a study with, I think it was 7 microdoses. And I feel like whenever I talk to people about psilocybin, they always like microdosing. And I'm like, we do the big dose. So the microdosing actually doesn't do that much. And a hypothesis in the literature is that you actually need the psychedelic effects to have the insights, whereas when you have a microdose, you don't have those. However, my study couldn't confirm that hypothesis because there was like a measure of how strong the psychedelic experience was. So then I worked out whether that lined up with how strong the treatment effect was. And I didn't find that. But still, a normal like high dose worked better than microdoses.
So with that information, I know, like, what do they deem as the benefits of microdosing? I know there's lots of conversations around it, but why would one microdose over just gone big?
Well, the studies that I looked at came to the conclusion that doing a bigger dosage actually works better. So if you do 1 or 2 doses, you can get positive effects for depression or anxiety or whatever else you're looking at for 6 months. That's what most studies looked at, but maybe even longer. But that was the follow-up period that they had. And I think the microdosing, it impacts your mood on a daily basis. So I think it can maybe be used to improve your mood on the day that you're taking it, but to have the long-term effects, you want that emotional release that you get from the big dose.
So when
I don't really know what the point of microdosing is. I never do it.
Yeah, we just go big boys. So when you're talking big dose, what numbers are we talking?
So in the psilocybin research, they don't talk about grams, they talk about milligrams because they don't use mushrooms. They synthetically create the psilocybin in a lab so that they can control how much psilocybin is actually there. So some studies used 25 milligrams, others used 35 milligrams. I think one study even used 70 milligrams from memory. So it varied, but anything from like 25 milligrams upwards, I think maybe even 20 upwards, that worked well. Whereas, the microdoses were like, I can't remember, but they were pretty small.
Do you imagine when it comes to that research, the fact that they use synthetic might have influenced and impact the research they found?
I do wonder how I'm not a biochemist or a psychiatrist. We don't learn a lot about those kind of things like medications and stuff. I do wonder, but the chemical compound should be the same. Yeah, of course, natural is always different. So if you ingest the whole mushroom, maybe you're getting other things on top of the psilocybin. But yeah, the research was very strong. So I looked at psilocybin for any psychiatric disorder. So I included, there's research on anxiety, depression, nicotine use disorder, alcohol use disorder, anorexia, body dysmorphic disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, and post-traumatic stress disorder. And psilocybin worked for all of those disorders, but it worked best for nicotine use disorder. Then I think it was body dysmorphic disorder, then I think alcohol use disorder, anxiety, and then depression. So even though it's been legalized for depression, the effect size actually wasn't the highest for depression. It was higher for other disorders. There's just not as much research to back those numbers as there is for depression.
So when you say, just because I'm not up to date with the lingo, when you say alcohol, what was the second word? Alcohol something disorder?
Alcohol use disorder.
So is that an alcoholic or is that, okay.
Yeah, it's an addiction.
Yeah. So that's where I was going next. So essentially addiction. So what did it not work for? Did you find anything that it didn't work for? Or have we just found the holy grail and mushrooms fix every problem on planet Earth?
I mean, that is my fellow students will actually send me memes about this where it just says, just give them psilocybin, it fixes everything. And they're like, that's you. And I'm like, yes. So the lowest effect size was for anorexia nervosa, but it was still a medium effect size. So that's still decent. And given that eating disorders are so hard to treat, it was quite promising for that as well. So no, I didn't find a single study that reported no effect.
Why is eating disorder so hard to treat? Is it because, is the ego-centonic part of that what makes it really challenging?
Yeah. Well
really?
Done. Yes.
So this is fascinating. So What is it about the egocentonic? Obviously, you can't see it, but on a deeper kind of physiological level, what is it about the egocentonic part that makes it so hard to treat?
So, from the perspective of the person, it feels integrated with their sense of self. So, it is aligned with their sense of self.
Like their identity.
Yes. So, it's hard for them to see the disorder because there's so much part of them and how they think, and it's just so integrated in themselves. Whereas depression is a lot easier for a person to pinpoint that they have a problem.
Okay.
Not all the time. Like, it can be hard for someone with a depression to recognize that as well. But the egocentonic disorders specifically, because it's part of their self, like it's become part of their self.
So is it okay? I hope this isn't too much, but I just want to get my head around it. So is it hard to treat once they see it? I understand that it's hard to treat because they can't see it and it's part of their identity. But is it hard once they can actually see it?
So for a patient to have insight into their problem will help in treatment because it will mean that they are more engaged in treatment and that they're more open. And if a patient is willing to get better, that definitely improves treatment outcomes. So let's say a patient with anorexia, if they can't see that they have a disorder, if they can't see that they need to put on weight to actually be healthy, then they will just not eat. But if they can see that they have a problem, that they're very unsafe, physically even, and they can see that they need to eat, it doesn't mean that they can automatically eat. There's still other hurdles to overcome. But for a patient to recognize the problem and then develop a willingness to change will definitely improve treatment outcomes.
What's the biggest, and if you don't know the answer, I'm just deep in this now. What's the biggest influence on egocentonic disorders? Is it like trauma? Is it more a case that often they're kind of, because I think, are you born with narcissism or is it developed? Well, there's a couple of disorders that you kind of, there's a pedophilia I think you're born with pretty much, aren't you?
I don't know.
Yeah, I was talking about this a couple of weeks ago. So what constitutes that at a very young age, do you think? I'm guessing trauma plays a role, but is there something that is strongest correlation?
Yeah, so most disorders have a biological component and then an environmental component. So it all plays together. For personality disorders, like for example, borderline personality disorders or disorder, most individuals that develop that have experienced trauma in their childhood. So there's actually been talk around reclassifying borderline personality disorder as a trauma-related disorder.
I thought so as well.
Disorder. There's a bit of talk about that in the scientific literature. And then for eating disorders, that can often also be trauma. I mean, trauma plays a role in almost every disorder. But for borderline personality disorder specifically, I just read something the other day where it said someone who develops borderline personality disorder is usually born with an emotional sensitivity that's higher than other people's emotional sensitivity.
So you can see that.
And that can be like, some people are born with a gluten intolerance. It's the same physiological intolerance to something. But then if they grow up in an environment that's invalidating, so for example, a child expresses their needs and the parents shut them down, they don't actually listen to them, they don't give them what they need, that's an invalidating environment. So it doesn't have to be trauma, but an invalidating environment, that together with the emotional sensitivity, that can then lead to borderline personality disorder. And the analogy that they gave is it's almost like you're born gluten intolerant and you're born into a family of bakers. Each of those things by themselves are not a problem. But if you are gluten intolerant in a family of bakers, you're probably going to have problems.
I often think about the people who socially most challenging, and I often come to that conclusion. It's so interesting that there's actual science around it, that they were probably the most sensitive ones at a younger age. And for that reason, they're over-indexed on being hard or, that kind of exterior ego, whatever it is. That's where, like, when I find someone really challenging, whether it's socially or they've just like, there's a hardened of them, I often unconsciously now almost have myself visualizing the child version, and it just like it softens me. I've still got a lot of work to do around my empathy, but like it softens me instantly almost. Like I can think of some people are just Does that happen to you? Have you ever heard of something strange? Yeah.
It makes sense. So every child is born with a temperament, and that can be being highly sensitive or maybe being louder than other kids or crying more or whatever it is. But then there's always the combination with the environment. So if someone has parents that are very loving and very caring, the temperament can not have a very big influence. But if you grow up in an invalidating environment where the parents just don't attend to your needs, those things just become louder and stronger. And then the child's behavior makes the parents' behavior worse. The parents' behavior makes the child's behavior worse. And it's just like this spiral. And there's always so many factors at play. But yeah, most of our problems stem from childhood. But you can never really pinpoint it's just biological, just environmental. It's always multiple things.
My friend, this has been fascinating. So many learnings. Thank you for jumping on and talking about all that. For those that want to find out more about the work that you do, where's the best spot to send them?
So my Instagram is at Lilly Katarina. So that is LILLY Kathaina. And very exciting, my husband and I are currently launching a new platform. You're actually one of the first to hear it, Blake.
This is fucking exciting. What's going on?
It's called Neurology, but Neurology, because it's all about learning how to rewire your brain, how to change your neurology, how to create a new neurology. Because my husband, Jay, is a hypnotherapist. He's trained in NLP and timeline therapy. He also studied psychology, and he is a mindset whiz. And so in my coaching, I work a lot with the unconscious mind. I work with people's limiting beliefs, limiting emotions, and he does the same. So we're now creating a platform where we will offer a variety of courses to help people break through their self-imposed limits. And yeah, like for most of us, it's our limiting beliefs that hold us back. And they all stem from childhood, and so many people don't know how to overcome them. So that is our mission, to help people grow into their true potential. And the Instagram for that is Neurology, so NEWROLOGY.io.
So good.
You can find us as well.
Gang, by the time this is out, that will be up and running. Great to chat, my friend.
Great to chat with you as well. Thank you.